The chamber of the alien council resonated with the subtle hum of technology and the muted rustle of ceremonial robes. Towering columns lined the hall, shimmering with holographic inscriptions of victories past. Representatives from dozens of advanced civilizations had gathered, their forms distinct yet unified by the certainty that the coming war was already decided. The council's ruling was to be more of a formality than a deliberation. Humans, the latest entrants into the galactic stage, were viewed not as rivals but as an inconvenient disturbance soon to be corrected. An elder of the Serac Dominion rose first, his translucent body glinting under the chamber lights. With slow, deliberate gestures, he presented casualty projections. They showed neat timelines, 3 days of skirmishes, 1 decisive fleet engagement, and an inevitable surrender by the 4th sunrise. The figures sparked murmurs of satisfaction. Representatives leaned back, mandibles clicking or tendrils coiling in approval. For them, the numbers were reality, mathematical proof of superiority. The human's weakness seemed obvious: fragile physiology, short lives, primitive starships patched together from stolen designs and outdated alloys. Against the engineered perfection of the great empires, humanity was judged as laughably inferior. A voice from the Veari enclave followed, smoother, dripping with ridicule. She reminded the hall that humans had never survived contact with a truly advanced foe, that their world still bore the marks of internal wars fought with crude weapons scarcely a century old. A species that once feared its own atmosphere burning from misuse of chemicals dares to challenge fleets older than their civilizations, she said, her words punctuated by ripples of derision. Nods circled the chamber, the consensus building with each insult layered upon the human's name. One dissent broke the harmony. General Cawthon, scaled and scarred from centuries of campaigns, shifted his heavy frame. He did not smile with the others. His growl rumbled low as he reminded the Council of humanity's unpredictability. He cited reports of human forces adapting rapidly in skirmishes along the frontier, devising countermeasures in hours where most species required cycles. He spoke of human soldiers fighting long after odds turned impossible, improvising tools into weapons when supplies ran out. But his warning was met with indulgent laughter. To the Council, Cawthon sounded like a veteran clinging to paranoia, haunted by too many wars. "Adaptation without power is nothing but flailing," replied the Serac elder, waving aside the warning. "They may scratch, they may improvise, but against order, against calculation, chaos always collapses." The chamber echoed with agreement. Dozens of voices added their assent, some harsh and guttural, others melodic, but all dripping with certainty. They saw humans not as a threat but as an opportunity. A brief war would demonstrate the futility of rebellion, reminding younger races that resistance was vanity. In that hall, arrogance was not subtle. It filled the air like incense, thick and cloying. Proclamations grew more confident with each repetition. Predictions shortened, perhaps 2 days instead of 3, perhaps hours rather than days. They spoke of parades on Earth's ruined cities, of shattered fleets displayed as trophies. The war had not yet begun, but victory was already woven into their imaginations. Yet beneath the grandeur of certainty, there was a silence no one noticed. Reports of small but sharp human victories were present in the Council's archives, buried under dismissive annotations. Instances where human ships had vanished from ambushes only to reappear behind enemy lines were logged but ignored. Tales of ground skirmishes where human units fought without supply lines for weeks were dismissed as exaggeration. The Council chose not to see what was inconvenient. Numbers, projections, tradition, these were easier than considering that a young species could challenge empires spanning millennia. The final decree was spoken by the High Speaker, whose voice reverberated through the chamber with mechanical amplification. "Humanity will fall in days. Their defiance shall serve as an example. Our fleets shall scatter their armies, and their leaders will kneel. The order of the galaxy will remain unbroken." At his words, the assembly erupted in synchronized gestures of agreement. Heads bowed, appendages curled, eyes glowed. Satisfaction radiated from every corner. They were united in belief, united in underestimation. The decision was recorded in the Council's archives as though it were history already written. A timeline was set, resources allocated, victory celebrations scheduled before the first engagement. Not one voice rose again in opposition. Cawthorne's silence at the end carried more weight than any protest could. He alone understood that predictions are not victories, and that arrogance has ended empires before. As the chamber emptied, the echoes of confidence lingered, filling the silence left behind. The council did not yet realize that in their certainty lay the seeds of humiliation. They had judged humanity by the standards of the known, never imagining that the unknown, creativity, desperation, and defiance, could rewrite the laws they trusted. To them, humans were already defeated. To history, however, the meeting would be remembered as the moment the galaxy's greatest powers sealed their own shame. The fleets gathered in silence across the void, vast armadas of alien steel stretching like tidal waves of machinery. To those who had prepared this confrontation, the outcome felt already secured. Entire star systems had been mobilized, carriers and war cruisers aligned in symmetrical formations perfected over centuries of doctrine. Their engines pulsed with the confidence of inevitability. The Council had not simply ordered a campaign, it had orchestrated a demonstration, a display meant to remind every watching species that rebellion against the established order ended in ruin. Against this ocean of firepower drifted the human presence, almost comically small. Their ships lacked uniformity, cobbled together from mismatched designs and varying levels of technology. Some hulls still bore the scars of atmospheric flight rather than the polished geometry of ships meant solely for space war. Their weapons were crude by comparison, railguns and missile arrays that seemed outdated when measured against energy cannons capable of tearing planets. Observers across the galaxy logged the imbalance with amusement. Predictions spoke of humans scattering within the first hour, their fleet disintegrating under the weight of precision fire. Yet something in their formation unsettled those who studied carefully. The humans did not spread themselves wide nor mimic the stately patterns of the older empires. They clustered tight, as if bracing for impact, their vessels overlapping fields of fire, their silence on calms betraying no ceremony. It was not the posture of arrogance, nor of desperation. It was stillness, a kind of waiting that suggested confidence without explanation. Where other species marked the eve of battle with speeches or ceremonial chants, humans prepared with wordless readiness. Alien commanders mistook it for fear. Reports streamed back to the council chambers describing humans as frozen, paralyzed by the enormity of what they faced. Generals congratulated themselves on the psychological superiority of their forces. Across the fleets, officers rehearsed the coming hours in their minds, a crushing first strike, methodical mop-up, and the swift collapse of whatever resistance Earth could muster. Numbers made the script airtight. Each alien ship dwarfed its human counterpart in raw tonnage, each weapon outranged and outpowered the crude arsenals arrayed against them. The conclusion, by all accounts, was foregone. Still, an undercurrent of unease threaded through those who had fought longer than they had calculated. Veterans noticed the way human vessels held position with unnerving discipline, without the minor errors or jitter common among inexperienced crews. They noticed the absence of wasted transmissions, the absence of ritual boasting. To eyes trained by centuries of war, silence could be more dangerous than bravado. Silence meant preparation. The void itself seemed to pause, as if aware of the moment. Engines dimmed to low burn, shields shimmered faintly in readiness. Alien ships adjusted their alignment with machine precision, while the human flotilla simply waited, smaller, darker, but strangely centered. No probes were launched, no preemptive salvos fired. The stage was set not by the overwhelming power on one side, but by the quiet endurance of the other. The Council's observers, however, chose only to see their own certainty reflected back at them. They described the humans as brittle, incapable of lasting beyond the first coordinated strike. They reassured themselves that humanity's history of short wars and improvised technology made them predictable. They measured strength only in mass, in the brightness of plasma arrays, in the age of civilizations. In their calculations, humans were the weakest link ever to raise a banner of resistance. And yet, within the narrow lines of human ships, crews worked without fanfare. Weapons were checked, but there was no ritualistic flourish. Commands were given in curt, simple words, almost entirely absent from intercepted channels. The quiet confidence that radiated from their stillness was not something numbers could quantify. They did not come to demonstrate grandeur or tradition. They came only to win, and that singular purpose burned beneath the silence. The fleets faced one another across the emptiness, light from distant stars glinting on their hulls. In the alien armadas, victory was already being celebrated in the minds of commanders who saw only inevitability. In the human line, no such assumption lingered. There was only readiness, sharp and unwavering, the kind of readiness that does not require belief in superiority, only the will to strike when the moment arrives. When the quiet stretched into its final breath, the difference between the two sides was laid bare. One trusted projections, models, and arrogance. The other trusted only itself. The battlefield was prepared, though none yet understood what that silence truly meant. The first volleys tore across the void with blinding confidence. Alien warships released waves of plasma and particle beams, each strike calculated with mechanical precision. The Council's fleets had rehearsed this moment countless times in simulators, confident that numbers alone would secure victory. Against any other species it might have. Against humans, it became the opening act of their undoing. Human ships did not scatter under the barrage. Their formation absorbed the impact with layered shields and evasive maneuvers executed in synchrony that no alien algorithm had predicted. Where models anticipated collapse, humans responded with calculated silence, allowing the alien commanders to believe, for the briefest seconds, that the outcome was already theirs. Then the counterstrike began. Instead of answering fire with fire in traditional patterns, human vessels moved with erratic precision, breaking formations only to reform at impossible angles. Their smaller, less impressive craft darted into blind spots the enemy's targeting systems had not accounted for, exploiting weaknesses in the vast and rigid alien formations. Railguns fired in coordinated bursts, projectiles accelerated to near-relativistic speeds striking vulnerable joints between armor plating. Missiles, dismissed as archaic, revealed programming that allowed them to adapt mid-flight, twisting through defensive grids with a kind of cunning no one expected from primitive weapons. More devastating than the physical strikes was the unseen assault. Human systems, dismissed as crude, carried with them infiltration codes designed not to overpower but to slip unnoticed through overlooked pathways. Within minutes, entire squadrons of alien vessels found their communications jammed, command hierarchies scrambled, targeting arrays reprogrammed to read friend as foe. Captains screamed across disrupted channels as their ships turned weapons upon their own allies, confusion spreading faster than the plasma discharges they unleashed. The battle should have stretched across days, with wave after wave grinding down resistance. Instead, the timeline collapsed into minutes. Human adaptability, long underestimated, manifested as ruthless efficiency. When one tactic closed, another emerged instantly, improvised with the clarity of desperation sharpened into mastery. No two attacks followed the same pattern, every strike rewrote expectations. Aliens accustomed to rigid strategies found themselves overwhelmed not by superior firepower, but by unpredictability that left even the most experienced generals paralyzed. One dreadnought, centerpiece of the alien advance, was reduced to a drifting carcass in less than 5 minutes. A concentrated barrage exploited the ship's energy venting system, an overlooked vulnerability because no prior enemy had ever considered targeting it. What alien engineers saw as an untouchable strength, humans identified as a flaw waiting to be broken. With its destruction, panic rippled through the formation. Fleets designed for flawless coordination fractured under the sudden absence of command. Observers in the council chambers stared at the live feed in disbelief. The narrative of inevitable triumph unraveled before their eyes. Fleets that were supposed to embody order devolved into chaos, their numbers turning from advantage into liability, as disrupted commands sent them colliding with one another, firing blind into friendly ranks. The humans pressed the advantage without hesitation, cold and unrelenting, as though every second had been rehearsed despite being impossible to anticipate. What struck hardest was the speed. Entire battles spanning systems had been expected to take days of attrition. Humanity dismantled centuries of doctrine in minutes. Alien ships designed with millennia of perfection in mind broke apart under the relentless improvisation of a species that had never known stability long enough to trust in static plans. Every projectile, every hack system, every coordinated maneuver declared the same truth. Humans fought with a creativity the galaxy had never seen, and it was lethal. By the time the first half-hour closed, the field no longer resembled a battle. It was a massacre, but not the one foretold. Alien wreckage drifted like broken monuments to arrogance, while the human fleet, smaller and seemingly fragile, remained eerily intact. The silence of their comms continued, voices hidden, faces unseen, as if victory required no proclamation. Their only statement was the devastation left behind, proof that the Council's decree had not merely been wrong but disastrously blind. The battle had not been a contest of strength, it had been a revelation. Humans had ended it not in days, not in hours, but in the fleeting span of minutes. The galaxy's most advanced armadas had been undone by a species it had dismissed as incapable of endurance. And though the guns now fell silent, the shock that followed would prove more lasting than any weapon's fire. Alien fire filled the void like a storm, sheets of plasma and energy bolts tearing across the darkness with the force of entire suns compressed into weapons. To the Council, watching from secure halls light years away, it looked like the beginning of the end. The projections had promised collapse, the models had confirmed annihilation, and so the first waves of destruction were greeted as validation. Yet while alien ships opened with overwhelming barrages, human vessels moved in ways no algorithm had accounted for. They did not retreat, nor did they meet power with equal force. Instead, their lines twisted into patterns the enemy had never seen. Small corvettes surged ahead, darting into blind zones between massive cruisers, their sudden accelerations breaking every assumption of predictable combat. Heavier human ships rotated fire in arcs designed to mask their true targets until the final second, striking not at armored bulkheads, but at overlooked systems, power vents, sensor clusters, engine conduits. The railgun slugs, primitive in appearance, carried kinetic energy so dense they shattered sections of armor alien science considered indestructible. The missiles followed, ancient in design but rewritten with guidance codes that shifted mid-flight. What should have been linear trajectories became chaotic spirals, weaving through laser grids and shield walls. Alien defense arrays tried to adapt, firing countermeasures calibrated to patterns long outdated, only to find themselves tricked by warheads behaving like predators rather than machines. Explosions rippled through command vessels in quick succession, their deaths out of sequence with the timelines the Council had declared immutable. And then came the assault no one had prepared for. Human code infiltrated alien systems through innocuous maintenance channels, exploiting forgotten pathways that engineers had dismissed as irrelevant. Entire wings of ships lost coordination as targeting data turned to static, friend and foe indistinguishable on tactical screens. Some vessels found their thrusters firing in reverse, others received orders fabricated by intrusions so subtle they seemed like commands from their own admirals. Confusion spread faster than any plasma beam. Fleets built on order and hierarchy began to collapse from within. Within 10 minutes, the precision of the alien advance disintegrated. Where once their formations stretched in flawless lines, ships now drifted into each other, colliding, exchanging fire without certainty of who the enemy truly was. Humans exploited the disorder without hesitation, pressing their advantage with cold efficiency. They did not rely on brute strength, for they lacked it. Instead, they thrived on chaos, turning every mistake into an opening. A species accused of being reckless revealed that its recklessness was discipline sharpened into unpredictability. The destruction of the dreadnought sealed the reversal. The ship had been considered the pride of the fleet, its armored hide proof against every weapon field tested across centuries. But humans had studied it differently. Where engineers saw perfection, they had seen imbalance, massive exhausts that vented excess energy in predictable intervals. A coordinated strike drove projectiles into those vents at the exact second of release, the shockwave detonating the vessel from its own heart outward. What was hailed as indestructible became a fireball in the span of breaths. Confidence broke with it. From the council chambers came silence. Representatives who had laughed at Cawthon's warnings now watched entire squadrons unravel. Their invincible fleets, armed with the most advanced weapons known, were not just losing but collapsing at a speed their minds could not process. The humans were not stronger. They were faster, sharper, utterly unwilling to follow any pattern alien war had ever taught. Every move was invention. Every strike was revelation. By the 20th minute, the battle was no longer battle at all. It was pursuit and demolition. Alien ships that had numbered in the thousands dwindled into wreckage and fire, their final transmissions filled with confusion rather than defiance. Human vessels cut through the remnants with precision, never overextending, never indulging in spectacle. They fought to end, not to impress. The void filled with drifting husks, monuments to certainty undone. What was meant to prove the weakness of Earth became the clearest demonstration of strength the galaxy had ever seen. The fleets that were supposed to last days had been destroyed in less than half an hour. Humanity had not matched power with power, they had rewritten the very nature of combat. The Council had misjudged them not by a margin but by an order of reality. And as the battle ended, with silence falling heavier than the wreckage left behind, a single truth remained undeniable. Humans had done in minutes what entire civilizations believed impossible. The battlefield drifted in silence, scattered with the remnants of fleets once hailed as invincible. Fragments of alien vessels glimmered faintly against the void, their broken shapes a testament to arrogance undone. Among them, the human ships remained, their silhouettes stark against the wreckage. They did not broadcast victory, did not demand recognition, did not speak at all. Their silence carried more weight than any declaration. Without a single word, they had redrawn the balance of power across the stars. The Council received no threat, no demand, no ultimatum. Humanity did not gloat over the ruin it had wrought. They simply withdrew, leaving behind the echo of destruction as their only statement. That choice unsettled the chamber more than conquest would have. To fight and win was expected of empires. To fight, annihilate, and walk away without boasting revealed a level of control the Council could not comprehend. It was not hunger for dominance that drove them. It was something far more dangerous, survival sharpened into mastery. Whispers filled the chamber as representatives considered what this meant. If humans could dismantle fleets in minutes and then vanish without pursuit, they could not be contained. Every empire knew how to respond to enemies that sought power, through alliances, concessions, or eventual retaliation. But how did one respond to a species that fought only when threatened, and when it did, ended wars with such finality? Their restraint was not weakness. It was confidence, the kind that required no validation. That restraint frightened the Council more than the weapons themselves. Reports trickled in from survivors, accounts of human vessels appearing where they should not, of systems failing without explanation, of commanders who could not anticipate even the simplest maneuvers. Each story added to the myth already forming. Humanity was no longer viewed as inexperienced. They were seen as unknowable, a force that refused to conform to the rules that had defined interstellar warfare for ages. A species dismissed as backward had shattered the illusion of stability on which the Council's dominance rested. Around the galaxy, younger civilizations watched with awe. For generations they had bowed to the established order, convinced that the Council's fleets were unchallengeable. Now they whispered of humans as something else entirely, a reminder that empires could fall and that power was never absolute. Even species who had never set eyes on Earth spoke the name with caution. The idea of humanity became larger than the battle itself. They were not merely victors, they were proof that unpredictability could outmatch centuries of doctrine. The Council's chambers no longer rang with certainty. Instead, calculations began anew, filled with hesitation. Alliances were reconsidered, treaties rewritten, strategies re-examined. Some suggested immediate peace, eager to avoid further confrontation. Others argued for secrecy, fearing that to admit what had happened would invite rebellion across the galaxy. But none could escape the truth. The humans had changed the game. They had revealed vulnerabilities no one wished to acknowledge, and once seen, they could not be unseen. What unsettled the Council most was the simplicity of the human motive. They had not fought for conquest or expansion. They had fought because they were threatened, and when threatened, they had responded with total, merciless efficiency. A species that needed no empire to validate its strength was one that could not be predicted. A species that fought only when necessary was one whose victories could never be bargained away. The restraint that followed their triumph was not mercy but a quiet reminder. Humans would fight only if forced, and if forced, they would end battles before they began. The silence that followed the engagement became its own kind of message. No speeches, no celebrations, no visible leaders demanding recognition. Just the undeniable evidence: a battlefield cleared in less than an hour, a council humbled, and an empire of assumptions shattered. The humans had not declared themselves rulers of the galaxy. They had done something far more enduring. They had shown that empires could be ended in minutes, and that certainty was no longer safe. When history recorded the war, the Council's declaration of humanity's imminent defeat would be remembered not as prophecy but as irony. The prediction of days had collapsed into minutes, and the lesson was etched in wreckage across the stars. Humanity had not sought glory, yet they had claimed something greater: fear, respect, and the unshakable truth that they were not to be underestimated. The hall where arrogance once thrived now sat in silence, haunted by what it had witnessed. Humanity had spoken without words, and the message was clear. They would not ask for recognition. They would not beg for place. They had carved it in fire and silence, leaving the galaxy to wonder not if humans could be defeated, but if anything could stand against them should they choose to act again.